one. Hey, this is Kirk Hilliard.
And this is Rusty Byrd. It's the Kirk and Byrd Show. And we are blessed to have with us today Jacquie Franciulli of Wahoos247 on the 247 Sports Network. Thank you for joining us, Jacquie.
Oh, thanks for having us. It's nice to be on the show.
Thank you.
Now, I'll let Kirk go ahead and plug her and then plug and tell you how you can subscribe. But just so you know, Jacquie, I have VCU in the background because I went there for undergrad, but I went to UVA for grad school. But I consider the two preeminent college basketball programs in the state of Virginia, just so you understand that.
We're still on good terms. We're good.
Yes.
We're going to kick off with basketball, and then we're going to talk a little bit of football and talk some things as far as UVA overall. And so this is going to be fun. We're glad to have Jacquie on. I've actually researched her and watched a lot of her content. Just do us a favor. If you get a chance, hit subscribe. You can like, share, comment, whatever you want. And then if you want any other content, let us know. So with that said, Rusty, we've got a wealth of information here. Jacquie lives in the Charlottesville area. This is what she does for a living. She's raising a family. She's there. Her husband is from the area. So we got her, for all of our UVA friends, and I was talking to Jacquie before we started, all the friends that we have as far as players and personal friends, this is going to be a treat. So Rusty, let's start off with basketball. UVA just defeated Wake Forest. Tony Bennett passed Terry Holland as the all-time leading wins leader in UVA history. And UVA appears to be in control of the ACC and trending for what I would say is like a second or third seed. Jacquie, tell me about UVA basketball, your take on where they've been and where they're going closing out the rest of the season.
Yeah, they've been fun to watch offensively. That's not something you usually hear when you talk about Virginia men's basketball, right? But they've been so fun to watch on the offensive side of the ball. I know people will say, but they still have those scoring droughts. But that's the thing. They're still able to, if they start hot, if Armaan Franklin, that's usually the key. If Armaan Franklin is feeling it, this team does really, really, really well on the offensive side. Now, what I like about what Armaan Franklin's been doing the last few weeks is that if his three ball isn't falling, he's going inside. And he's not afraid to attack the rim right now, which is what's been the big change. The other thing is Tony Bennett has been adjusting as the season goes on. He realized when he went small, their offense clicks. Their offense is much better. So you're seeing Ben Vanderplas come in and start. You're seeing Reese Beekman, Kihei Clark, and Ben Vanderplas. Isaac McNeely, a freshman, not afraid to take his shot. That's also been big. Tony Bennett said, he kind of said, stop putting on your parking brakes. And Isaac McNeely is starting to do that. He's starting to kind of get more into a flow. He's not afraid to take those big three shots, and he's been sinking them. And even when he doesn't get those three balls in, he's not afraid to get and try again. If he's got a good shot, he's going to take it. So I think that's been the big difference. And when you look at it any given night, it's someone else who is stepping up. So when you're an opposing coach, you're looking at this team, you're like, who am I going to key on tonight? Because someone else could be going into deep in double figures. It could be one day, it could be Armaan Franklin. One day it could be Reese Beekman, who is now fully healthy and has that nice burst that he was missing for 2 or 3 games when Virginia was kind of having some of those mid struggles there early on in the ACC conference schedule. So he's healthy. You've got Kihei Clark, who's just stepped up his game even more, which is, quite difficult to imagine, like at the end of last season, that he could even have another step in gear, but he does. So you got Kihei Clark, who's playing well. And then you have all these guys on the bench that could possibly even add more versatility, especially when you add a guy like Ryan Dunn, who's defensively can add so much to that side of the ball. And he's also gaining confidence. And when he's gaining more confidence, he's gaining confidence for Tony Bennett. He's also seeing more playing time. So it's been interesting to see who's been getting all those minutes And then sometimes you don't even see a true center on the court, which has been quite remarkable to see Tony Bennett kind of adjust there. And you're seeing a Virginia team score 70 points. You're seeing a Virginia team going in there, going 40% from the 3-point range. So it's been a very different Virginia team, but still with the same model, which is efficiency on offense, control the pace of the game. So you still have those same things that you know from Virginia basketball team, but just a little different when you look at the score line and you see how effective they are offensively.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You know, I think that one of the things over the years as a big UVA fan, and not just because I went to the school, but also just when I was a kid, growing up in the state of Virginia, you know, being a kid in the 80s with Ralph Sampson, Othell Wills, there was actually stickers, you know, it said Ricky Ralph Othell, and you knew what it meant, you know. And so growing up, being a big fan of UVA basketball over these years, I was so happy when they won the national championship, especially after what had happened the year before with UMBC and and being the first #1 seed to take that L. But one of the things I always thought, and I love Coach Ben. I before he even came here, I was always concerned about the offense. And I felt like that old saying, what did they say? The only person to hold Michael Jordan under 20 points was Dean Smith. You know, I thought that some of the athletes that we had on that team, guys, had they been in other programs, could light it up. And they had their times where they could get hot and play. But I thought that year's team, it was a great combination of Coach Bennett's system with a great defense, but a few ballers, guys that could put some points up, and that's what got him over the hump. How do you compare this year's team to that national championship team?
So when I look at this year's team, like there are some ballers on there. Like I said, there's some really nice talent on there, and I'm actually more excited about Virginia next season than I am. Although there's a lot of good possibilities for this year. When I look at, you know, Isaac Trout and Leon Bond that are both redshirting, and their ability when they both are available on the roster, and possibly Armand Franklin and Reese Beekman both possibly could return. They still have eligibility. You look at that team, I'm more excited about the combination of that team with offense and defensively and just the skill set that they'll have and their possibility to make a late run. But what you got on this team is that if, like I said, you don't know who's going to be the one to step up. Now, my worry is that Caden Shedrick is not having the progression that we expected at this point. He started off showing his aggressiveness underneath the rim, but I feel like because he got into so many foul troubles and sometimes not too fault of his own. I mean, when you get hit in the nose by an elbow, you shouldn't get fouled, right? You shouldn't be a foul on you, but it did affect him a little bit. It feels like he's got, I don't know if there's a better professional term, but the yips. It feels like he's not being Caden Shedrick. So that's the reason why sometimes I kind of struggle. There's going to be matchups where that small ball is not going to work. So what's going to happen in those situations? Now, against Wake Forest, they were able to overcome both Reese Beekman and Kaya Clark getting 4 fouls, which almost never happens at those two guys having 4 full fouls each. But they were able to, Tony Bennett gambled and risked it and having both on the court. Yes, but if one of those guys fouled out, you're going to get a question of, can they hold on against Wake Forest? So during the tournament, you're going to face a couple of possible mismatches where I don't know if this team can overcome in those situations if, let's say, Reese or Kihei are not able to go. Because although Armand Franklin offensively, he's the key to that offensive side. He needs to be feeling it. He needs to be aggressive. I think that's one of the keys to this team to be successful. But Reese Beekman being on the court is another. You can tell the difference when Reese is not on that court. I know Kihei is also a key, but we've seen what happens when Reese isn't healthy. We see a team that can get into their own heads and can go in those long scoring droughts and turn a 20-point lead to a 6-point lead to possibly the other team coming back and leading. So if I look at the national championship team, I don't see that balance yet from this team. I think I see it more next year. I see a little bit more dogs on the team next year. So I think that's where we are. Actually kind of remind me, my first college basketball team that I've ever covered was actually the Joe Harris Malcolm Brogdon, Akil Mitchell team. That's my favorite college basketball team I've ever covered. I kind of see a little bit of them in this team. So
Yes.
I can see that.
I think the NCAA tournament is always about if you're hot, and
Yeah.
small ball can win. If small ball is hot, it can win. But looking at the rest of the schedule, you don't have to play the Hurricanes again. And I believe Pitt is not on there. You got Duke at home. I believe NC State at home, Carolina on the road. And those are pretty much the big tests. I'm not counting out the Virginia Tech Hokies. Got to play them in Blacksburg, and it's to be seen. But I think if the team gets going into the ACC tournament, if they trend, they're going to be the top seed. And the question is that small ball and the players that you're talking about, because I was checking the message board today on the fans and what they're saying. And a lot of folks are talking about some of the same things as starters flipping. But, what do you see happening with the momentum of the team, how they're playing right now? I mean, this Wake Forest game was really close. They beat the Hokies pretty handily, but Wake Forest came down to the end. And again, I think Tony Bennett's the kind of guy that he's going to gamble with two guards. Those guards, one of them always, they're on the floor. And if one of them fouls out, that could be key. But if they get hot. So, going down the stretch, how do you feel? What does the team need to do to get better and get hot? Because a two seed and a 3 seed have won the NCAA championship again, and it's out there. And before you answer that question, I will say this: there is not one big, huge team at the top that's unbeatable. You got Purdue, Kansas, you've got Alabama, some other teams, but I mean, UVA is in the play. So my question to you is based on what you've seen, both the health of the team and trends. How are they looking going into that final stretch of the ACC with those games on tap? And by the way, one of the things I didn't mention is the lion's share of those games are at John Paul Jones in Charlottesville.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the schedule right here. Yeah, the next game is going to be Boston College at home. They have a week off, which is nice for them. They can actually recover a little bit from being on the road. And Wake Forest was a tough game to win because Wake Forest was undefeated at home, and that's a great environment to play in. That Forbes has done a good job to kind of waking up that program there at Wake Forest. So, and that was a tough game. That was one that, it was on because obviously you're coming in after facing an in-state rival. You're thinking, okay, you're going on the road to Wake Forest. That could be sort of that trap game that you're looking at. So they did good to secure that win. And then honestly, when you look at the rest of the schedule, at Virginia Tech is the one where you're kind of circling and be like, Virginia Tech had one heck of a game shooting. So I don't know if you can repeat that type of performance. I mean, they shot 46% from 3, if I remember correctly, and they still lost. And you come to think, like, who shoots 46% from 3 and still loses by 10? So, but at Virginia Tech, that's one that you kind of circle and be like, okay, that could be something where Virginia, if they overcome that, I mean, you face at UNC, but playing Louisville twice, Boston College twice, you've got Clemson coming to JPJ. So they could go on a nice run here going into the tournament. And what I would want to see, what's key for them is kind of what I mentioned with Caden Shedrick. Got to get that confidence back for him. I think that's going to be one of the things that you want Tony Bennett to do, what he wants to do too. He's comfortable with his guys right now. I mean, Ben Vanderplas is a good guy to have that versatility. He's kind of fit that role right now because of his size and how he moves. He's been able to get into those roles. But Tony Bennett wants Caden Shedrick to get back that confidence so he can be that guy who can attack the rim. He can get those rebounds. So that's who you want to get confidence in the next few games. And honestly, if you're looking at the schedule, like, there's a lot of opportunities to give Caden some minutes because that's what you need. If you're getting so many close games, you're not going to get those minutes for Caden because you're going to go small ball because that's what's been working for you. So that's for Virginia. They need that bench. They need the ability to adjust their lineup to fit their opponents. That's something that Tony Bennett talked about, I think, even before the season. He was talking about how he loved his roster this year and depth because he can change the lineup to fit his opponents. Right now, it's been the small ball, but he hopes that Caden and Cafaro can both of them also help by performing well and gaining back those confidence. And now Ryan Dunn's come out. I think he's played his career high in minutes. You had him, I think he had like 17 or 18 minutes against Florida State. He had 24 minutes the last game. Having those guys get more minutes, Isaac McNeely getting more confidence. And if you have, kind of build those guys in, so then by the time the tournament comes, if you have an injury to Reese Beekman or Kihei Clark, because that's always a worry, you have those guys who come of those experience. So I think Virginia can really build some nice momentum. It's a very, at UNC is always going to be hard to play with, and you've got Duke coming to JPJ. So at UNC is honestly, and at Virginia Tech are only two of the games on the road that you go like, oh, this could be a tough environment. But all the other games are all at home.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, Jackie. As a fan of the ACC and so many teams in this league, it was just the other day though I was looking and I see where Clemson is the number 1 team in the conference and they're ranked number 9, and UVA's 10, and Miami 17. But a lot of the traditional powers aren't ranked. And my first thought was, well, is the ACC down this year in basketball? But I mean, I know you have some of the traditional, like Notre Dame has been down for a while now. Louisville is like totally, like, they've hit the pits. But I mean, Syracuse hasn't really been legit over the last couple of years. Duke's got a new coach. NC State is NC State. I think the ACC will still get a lot of bids. But what is your overall thought about the conference this year? Is it up, down, about the same?
I think it's about the same as last year. I didn't buy that the ACC was down last year. I think that was the narrative that a lot of people were mentioning it as we got to the NCAA tournament, because they're talking about like, oh, ACC should get less bids in the Big Ten. And then when you came to the tournament time, the ACC prevailed a lot over these other teams that they were discussing. I think when you look at the ACC, you see a lot of ACC teams defeating each other. And honestly, a lot of them are just evenly matched. I think anyone could be anyone in the ACC. So I think there's always a narrative of saying that the ACC is down, but honestly, there's a lot of talent in the ACC, and there's just a balanced conference. So when you go to Miami, I went to Miami. I remember watching, Larry Nagin in the beginning of his coaching career at Miami, and they had it was James Dews that came in, and that team starting to get a little bit more buzz. And now Miami is being a consistent ACC threat. That was not something that happened early on when Miami went to the ACC.
Right.
It was usually just North Carolina and Duke. Now you saw Miami defeat Duke. That started getting a little bit more buzz. And other teams like Virginia Tech, they have started to come on into his own under Mike Young. So you've seen a lot of the ACC teams growing and recruiting well. And so you're having these teams balance each other out. But someone who's not watching the games day in, day out, not watching these teams will think, oh, Duke lost to Virginia Tech this week. They're obviously not good. No, just that Virginia Tech's got some good playmakers themselves, and Mike Young's done a good job recruiting. So I think the ACC is about where they were last year, to be fair. I think they have some really good teams. Like Wake Forest is not ranked, but when you watch them against Virginia, they've got some very nice guys. Like Tyree Appleby is a hell of a ball player. So when you look at that, you say like, they just have a very balanced competition between this conference. So I always, when everyone tells me about the ACC being down this year, I'm like, well, just wait till the tournament time, and you're going to see how good the ACC is compared to other conference, because you're going to see those matchups.
The first thing that came to mind is the SEC is, and you used to be at Florida, and we're going to, in the last part of the segment, going more into your background, but the SEC is starting to come up. They've got Alabama, they've got Texas A&M, they've got some teams, so they're coming up. And I would also add that Syracuse, national powerhouse, has been down since they've been in the ACC. Louisville is winless in the ACC.
Yeah.
But transitioning to recruiting, then we'll go to football. So basically, UVA's got 2 signees and a transfer, but Blake Buchanan was just named the McDonald's All-American. He's 6'9", 215-pound big guy from Boise, which is so classic of Tony Bennett, to go to Idaho to get a player.
He was unranked when Tony Bennett recruited him too.
There you go. High Tides pull it up. You get an offer by Duke. By the way, if you knock Kentucky out, who's going to have one of the best classes ever this year, Duke is right up there in the recruiting, and Virginia's holding strong. But for the Cavalier Wahoo fans out there, tell us a little about what you know about Blake Buchanan and then the Jersey City kid, Elijah Gertrude, which is shooting guard, combo guard. But what do you know about those, Jackie?
Yeah, sure. So one thing about Tony Bennett, he has done a good job adjusting to the recruiting landscape, which is hard for anyone right now, college basketball, college football. And he's adjusted really well because he's still recruiting the same individual guys. So like Blake Buchanan, Elijah Gertrude, there are guys that still believe in the process, because what you're also worried about now is also just entering the transfer portal after you're not playing a year. So these guys still believe in the process. Like Isaac Trout and Leon Bond talked to Tony Bennett and decided to redshirt. They are the ones who came up to that decision themselves, which is, you know, different than what you expect in this transfer portal era. So those two guys also know what it takes. Elijah Gertrude is right now recovering from an ACL tear. So he's out for a little bit, but he expects to be ready for the summer workouts in Virginia. So you've got two really good ball handlers. What I like about Buchanan is he kind of reminds me a little bit. He's got the aggressiveness that you see from Caden Shedrick, but a little bit more, I would say. I want to say he kind of reminds me of a little bit of Anthony Gill. I like him, and I think he compares a little bit to Anthony Gill. So Blake Buchanan he was unranked when Tony Bennett offered. He came for an official visit. And then Gonzaga got involved, and you're thinking, okay, a kid from that side of the country, Gonzaga. And then he just loved Tony Bennett and what Tony Bennett was able to do. And then he started going to different camps and different AAU events. And then he just blew up. He became, I think he's top 100 player on 24/7. He quickly rose to a 4-star. And Tony Bennett once again secured two really great players. Elijah Gertrude is also ranked a 4-star on 24/7. And this is 2 consecutive classes for Tony Bennett to recruit top talent. You know, I think the 2022 class was his best class ever that he signed. And in 2023, it wasn't too far behind. So Tony Bennett has been adjusting well. And what I like about him is that when you, for example, in the press conference last game, when you had Steph Curry there with Ty Jerome, the first thing he did was say, wasn't it great for our guards to see those 2 great guards right there? One won a national championship for the NBA, one national championship right here. Isn't it great that our players got those players to watch? So recruits are listening to his press conference and listening. I had an NBA, Steph Curry was there. And then he's also done a good job during press conferences, jokingly, and always a smile on his face, saying, you know, our players have always had longevity in the NBA. We're not just one and done in the NBA. We've got a lot of players that are there longer. So that's what I hear from recruits too. Like guys like Blake Buchanan, like Elijah Gertrude, when you talk to them, and even other guys that visit, you know, during the Houston game, there are a lot of kind of visitors there. They all mention that although the pace is different, they always acknowledge that Virginia basketball is a little different when you're looking and watching them. But they always say, if I go to Virginia, I know I'll have a long career. And I'll also have a background, the education, but I know if I make it to the NBA, I am staying in the NBA. So that has been something that we've seen from recruits.
Jackie, before I want to touch real quickly on women's basketball and the women's side of the house for UVA. But I want us to have you back on. 2 reasons. Football season, you've covered Florida and the SEC, but your Hurricanes, we don't even have to go there now. We don't have to go there. But that school, the tradition of football, outstanding. But right now, Jim Larinaga is making that a basketball school.
Right. Yeah. No, I was a junior in college for the last game of the Orange Bowl when UVA came and defeated Miami. That was a junior in college.
I remember that. Yeah.
Hey, Jackie, if you want to feel old, or you want us to seem old, spring break my senior year on Gino Toretta was pledging my fraternity at Miami, and I ran into him. He was a freshman, so that's how old we're getting. But before we transition to football, I want to ask you this: Tony Bennett is not a one and done kind of guy.
No.
And North Carolina is not a one and done. Supposedly, John Wall wanted to do one and done, and Roy said no. So one of the changes with Hubert Davis becoming the head coach there is he's going to be able to adapt. Before we get to football, I want to transition to that, is what do you see that That's a big one because the one and dones are so big. Duke has gotten aboard. Kentucky's perfected
That
it.
will never happen at Virginia.
Never?
That will never happen at Virginia. That'll be an administration will have to change their stance and how things work, but also Tony Bennett. If Tony Bennett is the head coach, one and dones will not happen at Virginia.
You know what? I agree with you, but they used to say that about Mike Krzyzewski too, and that's become one and done central. So
yeah, Rusty. I just looking like knowing Tony Bennett. Like I remember covering him when I first got here the first time on the beat, and knowing how he's handled the program now, I think he's had success the way he does it. Kids love the way he does it. I just don't see him changing.
Well, for the record, I don't like it. I just wish they could go straight to the pros. Yeah. And I wish kids played together more and got their degrees. Too many kids are not getting their degrees. But in some instances, it's you have to produce. But Rusty, take us into football.
But I'll say this: with the NIL, a lot of kids, especially on the football side, but a lot of kids don't feel like they have to leave. Armando Bacot at UNC, he's doing his fourth year, and he might be making more money. We don't know, but he might be making more money than he'll probably be a first round pick. But if he was a second round pick, or playing in the G League, a lot of these kids,
we're going to talk.
They don't need to get out as early now.
But we're going to talk about basketball all night. So let's change. But I will say this, Rusty, it's a good point. But what UVA needs to do with the NIL is they need to start making the cooperatives.
Well, basketball NILs are doing pretty good. K. Clark signed a deal with Roback, the apparel company that's based out of Charlottesville. He has his own line with Roback. I mean, the basketball program is doing really well with NIL. So I will say that. Yeah, so I think with UVA basketball, it's been a little easier with NIL because of their previous success. Right. And there's also not many players. So it's been easy to kind of go into NIL. And I mean, for Virginia basketball, and we're going to touch on recruiting now, but for football, for all that, basketball is in a different zone as UVA football. You've got great facilities in the John Paul Jones Arena. You have success in the program, recent success that kids will have watched you play on national TV. You have success that has been sustained since that run with Joe Harris in the NCAA tournament in 2013, 2014. So that is the difference between basketball and football. So NIL actually plays a bigger role with basketball, not recruiting, but once they get into the program, they can see potential to grow their brand. I mean, Ben Vanderplas had T-shirts from Locker Room Access all around the national television for the Houston game. It was all lined up and the cameras were showing his T-shirt out there. That itself is great promotion for the program. So Virginia basketball, I have no worries about NIL because they're a brand that is already selling itself.
Yeah. So Jack, real quick, if you give us a minute or two on the women's program.
Right. Yeah, Coach I love Coach Mox.
Yeah, me too. And I love a lot of the players they have in that program. But they were doing outstanding before they got into ACC play. But how do you see this season kind of playing out? They're in the heart of the ACC schedule. But do you think they'll start to put it together? It looks like they have some games up that they can maybe win. And you think they have a chance to make the tournament?
I think they're right on the bubble for the tournament. It's going to be hard because, man, they've had a rough stretch of ranked opponents. I mean, and on the road too. So it's been hard, especially when you think Mary McLean got hurt and out for the season. If she was still playing, I see a different team. I love the fact that Yonta Vaughn has kind of stepped up. I think she's going to be an exciting player to watch. Sam Burnell, she should have played today against Notre Dame. That she was called for fighting foul against Florida State when she was just releasing her leg. That was ridiculous. So she didn't play against her old team.
Some of her games I ref some of her games in high school, and she was amazing. As a 10th grader, I was just unbelievable talent.
Yeah, she has done really. It's amazing to see her fan section at the JPJ when she's playing now. And I think this is going to be a year, like no one expected Coach Mox to come here and make a national championship team in the first year. No one expected that. They expected to see progress. and you expected to see a new energy. And when you see these women on the bench and you see these women out there, you see a new energy, a new fire. You never think they're out of it. I actually took my kids to watch them as a fan. I had my coworker cover the game, and I took them as a fan for that Boston College game. And the energy in that, JPJ, as a fan, that was my first time experiencing on that side, because my daughter loves basketball. So seeing it that way, it was incredible. People were in it. You haven't seen that around the program for a long time. And what I like about Coach Mox is that she got to UVA and she said, I have facilities now. I have a program that had success in the past and created some amazing players. So what am I going to do? I'm going to recruit the local talent. I went out and I got Sam Burnell in the transfer market. I went to Louisa County and I got Olivia McGee, the top 50 player in the country. I went to 10 minutes from my school to Stab, and I got Kimora Johnson, who's a top 25 player. So next year you're going to have Madison County, Louisa County, and Almar County all covered. And not just because you're recruiting locally, but 3 of the best players in their respective class. So Coach Mox did an amazing job. And just by doing that recruitment, how she handled it, she's already won fans. But because the product on the field, on the court is better, she's also gained more fans, and people are confident that although they might not win this year as you would want as a fan, this program is on a high trajectory. And next year, I think next year is going to be the year where they can go far in the AC. Although you're looking at the schedule as a competitor, these women are going to fight every game. But that's the thing. You see fight in them. That's something you haven't seen in the last few years. You see that energy, you see that fight, and you see exciting basketball. It's fun to watch them play. So it's I know we've started covering, it's a rare thing to see like a 24/7 sports covers women's basketball and women's basketball recruiting, but we've started doing that because people want to hear about it. We have a beat writer just for women's basketball now because people want that.
I don't think it hurts at all to have Dawn Staley doing as well as she's doing at South Carolina. And then Tammy Reese, those were the backcourts when we were in school, probably the best women's backcourt ever at UVA. I think that's a tide that rises that helps UVA to reestablish things. And Rusty, you and I can attest to this. Northern Virginia and DC is huge for women's basketball. It's bigger than men's, honestly, because of our friend Tamika Dudley at Sidwell Friends has national recruits just right down the road to Charlottesville. But so let's shoot over to
football.
Yeah. So let's actually start by talking about the recruiting class. Right. And the biggest thing with football recruiting in college is the portal. It's crazy. UVA right now is hustling with probably 1, 2, or 3 offers. I would guarantee you they're going to make another offer or 2, and that's going to change. I know that's happening for a fact because they're talking to some kids that I talked to their parents. But, one of the things is this
I'm curious.
I can't say it. I don't do that. But with the Cavaliers, one of the big things, Jackie, is that Cameron Robinson from Essex, which is the top-rated recruit in the class, he was gonna flip supposedly.
He was.
Go to Florida State.
We had a commitment story all ready to go for the Florida State site.
Right, and that is key because that's a big win. And by the way, I think this is going to become bigger and bigger with UVA and Tech. They're going to start going head-to-head for more players because they're both reestablishing. Cameron Robinson's last trip before he committed was to Blacksburg, and he committed to UVA. So the staff is doing well there. But I just want to get your take on recruiting, the challenges. For a while, George Wells owned the state of Virginia. Then it went over to Frank Beamer, and they're rebuilding. But we talked before we went recording about the recruiting territories. But what is your take? Because it is really about recruiting and getting the best players, especially at home in Virginia. So you're so close to the action. What is your take on recruiting, how it was and how it's going?
Sure. First off, that was a great win for UVA. Cameron Robinson was an amazing victory for them, beating both Florida State and South Carolina. Though South Carolina wasn't the biggest factor in that recruitment. It was between Florida State and Virginia. It's still good that you defeated an SEC program that had, that has buzz around it. Beamer has done a good job at South Carolina. So that was all Clint Symptom. I think he's not a coach that you hear often when you're talking about Virginia. A lot of people talk about, obviously if you're from Virginia, you talk about Chris Slade, you talk about Coach Higgins, you talk about them, but Clint Sintom is often forgotten. He's a UVA alum and he's connected to the program.
Woodbridge.
Exactly. He's great. He's known in Northern Virginia.
Garfield.
People tend to forget.
Garfield,
People tend to forget about him. But honestly, he's one of their best recruiters. He went after Cameron Robinson, got him early before anyone knew about him. I mean, if you go to where he's from in Essex High School, it's not a lot of people who go to that area. And although they have a really good burger place in town, and one of the best burgers in Virginia, that's the slogan that it says. And it was good milkshakes too. I went there for a game. But he got him before, established a great relationship with the family. Cameron Robinson visited several times in the fall. And then when Florida State came, and don't get me wrong, Florida State did a good job recruiting. They had in-home visit, official, then in-home visit. They kind of bookend that official visit. What Virginia did, they went 8 coaches deep to Cameron Robinson's basketball game on Thursday night before that South Carolina official. And then they went in-home with him and told him, you can be one of 3 linebackers at Florida State. No one's going to be focused on you. At Virginia, we're building a program around you. You, Cameron Robinson, are Virginia football. That was a good message. And that was Clint Sintom that came up with that. So Clint Sintom is one of the best recruits. Now, what this cycle kind of showed is, they did a good job in state. They were able to kind of get Miles Green from Highland Springs. That was Coach Downing was the head of that recruitment, but they also were able to get Dante Hawthorne. They're also able to get Tyler Coleman, a versatile athlete. So they're able to keep a lot of in-state guys home. But then what I really liked is that sometimes when you're Virginia, you're going to face an issue where, yes, you want those top 20 kids from Virginia to stay home, but you're going to have to fend off the Penn States, the South Carolinas, the Tennessees. Virginia's become a place where a lot of people want to recruit. So what they did was they went south. They went to Georgia. They went to Florida. They went to Tennessee, which has a lot of talent. That's the Southeast, and the Southeast has a lot of talent that goes undiscovered, and they're not being fought over with the Floridas and the Florida States and the Miamis and Alabamas. And you're recruiting really good athlete. Like they're having a kid on grounds this past weekend, Devin Clark. If Virginia is able to secure that commitment, he's going to be their second highest commit of this class. And I actually put a crystal ball in for them after this weekend, because he is a track guy who's got a Missouri, I think it's Missouri, Auburn, and Mississippi State offer for track. And speed covers a lot of technique errors in the beginning. Speed covers a lot of things. And he's a speedy guy, and that'll be a good get. He's from Marietta, Georgia. So that's what Virginia's been able to do. They kind of adapted as the class went on and say, yes, we want more in-state connections, but that's going to take time. So let's use our connections to get some of the Southeast. Virginia has so many hurdles they need to jump when it comes to recruitment because of admissions, and you have to recruit the right type of kid. If you're looking for NIL, you're not going to go to University of Virginia. You're not going to have the Jaden Rashada saga at University of Virginia. Right. That's not going to happen. NIL is for those students already on ground. So a guy like Nick Jackson, that's a guy that would get NIL deal. Brennan Armstrong, who got the local McDonald's deal. Those are the guys who will get the NIL options, but not a guy that is not signed or even played a down of football. So that's different when it comes to UVA and other programs. Also, it's state law. You also got to work with your state on that situation. That's the problem with NIL right now too. Now, what Virginia does in the transfer portal, that's also very different. That's where NIL, I think, has more of an effect than in high school. I think the NIL is used more of a scapegoat when you don't get a kid, saying, oh, it's because of NIL. If you're not a 4-star or 5-star, if you're not a number 1 quarterback in the country, Arch Manning, or Jaden Rashada, you're not going to be affected by NIL as much. I think that's kind of like the boogeyman that everyone talks about. But in a transfer portal, NIL is a big factor. What also is a big factor for UVA is academics. You have to be accepted into UVA. You also have to remain NCAA eligible at UVA. And that's the hardest thing. It's not about GPAs when it comes to, they've had guys from Yale be turned away by admissions. It's because it's not about GPA, it's about credits. You have to have the correct class for them to accept that credit so that you can remain eligible. If not, you're going to be behind. It's kind of what happened to Phil Simms. He was behind the 8 ball and he became ineligible because he couldn't keep up with the credits and stay eligible. So if you're Virginia, your transport list went from this to this, and just because of academics. So usually for them, they have to recruit either grad transfers and hope they can get into a graduate program, which actually one of the linemen last year didn't. Matt Collensteiner did not get into the graduate program. He wanted UVA, which is the reason why he didn't come. And then you have maybe the ones that are like first year or second year, because it's easy to catch up in credits. So it's really hard once you start cutting down all those groups. So you go from thousands in the portal to maybe just a couple hundred. Then you're counting on, if it's an old lineman in the portal and he's good and he's academically eligible, well, guess what? Alabama probably wants him. So NIL will come into a factor. So it's hard for Virginia. So they're managing, but it's still a learning process for them and how they have to adapt to how do you recruit to Virginia.
Let me ask you something, Jack. I know UVA, Notre Dame, a lot of these ACC institutions are higher academic schools, and everyone has these high standards. Is UVA one of the only ones though that keep it this difficult? And is that a UVA only thing, or is it the entire ACC? Because Miami's a great academic school. So is UNC, Wake Forest, not Virginia Tech, because Kirk went into. If Kirk could get into Virginia Tech, anyway. But is that a UVA thing where they're making it tough? And then if it is, if you're a Tony Elliott, don't you have to think about some of that when you take that job?
Yeah, and that's the thing. He did think. I think every coach comes in thinking, I understand academics is an issue. But then when you're actually going through the process, you're like, whoa, this is a lot more than it's not just about GPAs. If I can recruit a 4.0 guy coming from Stanford and he still can't get in, okay, I didn't expect that. So the problem you have with Virginia compared to UNC and Stanford and Notre Dame is that Virginia's, if you look at their undergraduate, portfolio of what is actually offered and what type of curriculum they offer, what type of like English, what type of math, one of those standard courses is very different from other programs. Stanford has a more wide variety of courses offered. Notre Dame, more wide variety. UNC, more wide variety. And that's something that Bronco Mendenhall actually, I was talking to people when I first came back to the beat. Bronco Mendenhall was saying you need more of like a general studies or something to help, because right now there's no matching credits in several type of transfers, and even high schoolers. I mean, it's very different. Like you don't have those general studies requirements or communications programs. I remember when I was in broadcast journalism and psychology in the University of Miami, and Comm 101, there was a lot of football players in that class. They don't have those classes which allow you to get the credits, your general credits for your freshman and sophomore year. They don't have those at UVA. So it's not just about the academic restrictions. It's about what's available at that school academically as far as majors and options for, especially if you're a transfer. So that's why whenever someone says that UVA needs to adapt, it's not just the football program or the football office. It's UVA in general. And it's hard to change that, because then you're talking about administration, you're talking about admissions, you're talking about creating new programs to make yourself a little more moldable to the landscape. So that's harder to do, but that's a difference between a Notre Dame, a Stanford, a UNC, or Duke, and Virginia. There's other options and other courses that UVA doesn't offer, which again puts the transfer issue and all that stuff as well.
Wow, great. I didn't know that. You just educated me and our fans.
Another thing that came to mind for me is, George Wells being from Pennsylvania, and UVA's had a great tradition with Pennsylvania. Dan Ellis, I believe Matt Schaub is from there. Great running backs. And that has kind of died down. So I think that coming back, and by the way, with what you're talking about, and we're going to transition to, before we talk a little bit about your background, is the current staff and what they're doing, is that I believe, and we're talking like a lot of these guys that were in play for getting the job, that was a big issue, was would admission standards be lowered or whatever. And I think that came into play, but transitioning, what do you think? Virginia has a rich tradition in football. It's top heavy. It's had a number of just incredible recruits, unbelievable. Now, overall, it's a little different. But what do you think Tony Elliott needs to do to get back to the level that George Welsh laid? Because that story of we're building something here, the infrastructure is changing, that can't be said anymore. So what do you think the biggest challenge there is? We talked about Virginia. I don't know that Virginia will ever get back to Virginia and Virginia Tech get 20 out of the top 25. But what do you think the biggest challenges are for Virginia football, Coach Elliott, the great staff? I mean, what do you see going forward? Because we had an earlier episode where we both predicted, I don't see Tech or UVA getting more than 5 or 6 wins. I think that's above, because it takes time to build. But you being on ground, what do you see? I know they're breaking ground on a football-only complex, which Liberty has, by the way, in the state.
Liberty is in Liberty and JMU. Now, those two are kind of scary if you're in state right now.
Yeah, that's right.
What's your feelings on where things are going? What Coach Elliott's taking over?
I think it's going to be, Bronco Mendenhall, I was able to get them in the top 25 in 2019 when they went to the Orange Bowl. So it is possible. It was kind of funny. I was covering the Gators and got to see UVA. I think it's possible, but you've got to temper your expectations year in, year out. I think Coach Cutcliffe had and Coach, Clausen has quite the blueprint on how you do it. Is you're not going to have a consistent winning team. You're going to have a team that you consistently develop. And as they get older, you're going to have a good season. You're going to have a bowl game. Now, with the ACC leaving the divisions, that's going to be harder for Virginia to reach an ACC championship game. It's going to be nearly impossible for Virginia. I know it's going to be hard to take that one, but it's going to be nearly impossible for you to get the ACC championship game without the conferences now. But you're going to have some good, 8-9 win seasons if you can just get, like, for example, getting some of the guys they got, like Devin Clark, who didn't have one Power 5 offer until Virginia offered. But again, like I said, track, he got several SEC offers. Finding those guys and then slowly developing them until they reach their potential. And that's a team that's going to be successful. Then hopefully you're able to, if you develop now, so it takes around 3-4 years, you're hoping that you only have like a down year, maybe every 2 or 3 years until you get the next bunch. The big key is making sure you have numbers on the O-line, which they don't right now. That is the key you need. You need experienced O-line to protect your quarterback so that you can run the offense that you want. And then just slowly making sure your roster is balanced enough to keep that. And then also recruit your locker room year in, year out, because the problem that these programs like UVA will have is they're going to come and poach your O-linemen that are doing good. We saw that with Olu, who won every single award possible at Michigan. They're going to come and be like, oh, that 2-star that you guys got, you know what? You guys developed him in a good player. Let's offer him a couple $1,000s and then come to our program to win a national championship. So you're UVA, you got to make sure you continuously recruit the locker room by having sustained success. And I don't mean winning 9-10 games. I mean, if you're bowling, you're getting national exposure for these guys, allowing these guys to get in front of the NFL teams. We've like a game against Syracuse, there was plenty of NFL scouts at Syracuse to watch several of these Virginia players. I talked to some of them and they were there to watch, Anthony Johnson, Ventrell Cypress, Brendan Armstrong, Dontavian Wicks. They wanted to watch those guys. So making sure you have those opportunities there. Again, it's going to be a struggle. You're going to have to adapt to this new world of college football. So if you're Virginia, yeah.
Are the UVA fans, I look at the message boards. Like, are they realistic? They want to have their standard of being this academic, blah, blah, blah. But then if they're going to complain if somebody's not winning. And that's what they did with Bronco,
Yeah.
And not that I was a Bronco fan, but I did, you can't have it both ways and not give people time to develop and get the program going, but also just what you stated, what are our real expectations,
Right.
Yeah. And because what can happen is you can win, 8 games, maybe 9 games, and then your biggest thing you want to do is beat Virginia Tech again. Is that what the fans really want?
I think you just, if you're a fan, you got to expect a bowl game. That's your bare minimum. I think that's what a fan wants. If you want a good bowl game, just want to go to postseason play. I think Virginia, the last few years, unfortunately, they haven't had a bowl game. After the Orange Bowl, you had that COVID season. Then afterwards, their game was canceled in Boston due to COVID. So, and then this year it was just a lot of stuff that happened outside of football this year for Virginia. And it was a tough year for them a lot of different ways. So this year for this team, and it's going to be hard because, I mean, look at Virginia's schedule this year, and it's just, you're starting at Tennessee. I mean, and then you have James Madison as your home opener. And that's scary to me if you're a Virginia fan, seeing what JMU is able to do. So for Virginia, I think fans, you want them to win, of course, but I think the expectation should be, again, it's that trajectory of having 1 or 2 years where you build your program, get these players that you develop, and by the 3rd or 4th year, that's when you see your fruits of your labor. And that's when you see these players develop into a better team and you're playing cohesive. If your recruiting and your evaluations are accurate, I think that's the key there too. You have to make sure your evaluations are accurate, but you also need to balance. If you're Virginia, you have to use your resources effectively. You're not Florida with like 65 support staff members that needs like a whole bleacher to fill in a picture with all your recruiting staffers. You have a handful of people handling your recruitment, which is insane when you consider how many kids enter the transport on a daily basis.
That's a good one, Jackie.
So that's the key. So right now, so if you're like, let's say last year, I think Tony Elliott learned a lot during his first spring. Yes, it was great that Arch Manning was on campus. Yes, it was great that Nicholas Harbor was on campus. But those two guys were never going to go to Virginia. Let's just be honest here. Those guys were never going to sign. So was it great to use your resources on those two? Or should have you been going after a Jeremiah Coney, a running back from the Richmond area? Should have been going to other guys that are kind of the mid-tier 3 stars, maybe lower 4 stars. So this is when Virginia adapts. They start going early. Now, the only thing that I want to see if the staff adapts to is they don't cast a lot of offers. They still do the Clemson model of, they have like this tier system of like, you're our guy, so you got an offer. Then they go next man up, and then they have the bullpen. So you have a couple guys that are waiting. They still have valuations, like kind of 5, 6 guys, but then they'll have 2 guys that'll be the next up to offer if the guys in the first tier aren't coming to Virginia. That's great if you're Clemson, because, I don't know how many times Florida was recruiting a guy down when I was covering them. Clemson comes in and offers, and boom, that's Clemson's kid. But that was Clemson power. That's the brand power. Virginia doesn't have a brand power. So what Bronco Mendenhall did was he offered early and offered a lot. So I'm not sure if Tony Elliott's model is going to work. We'll see in the 24 class. Again, I always said 23 was going to be hard to grade him because he came in late and all the staff members were late. So the 24 class was going to be where we can judge. So this is where we're going to see, can they not cast a wide net of offers? I think they need to cast more offers, but we'll see how this works moving forward.
I was going to point, I'm sorry, Rusty, but I was just going to point out that, look, this is what is out there. Too many players that left UVA in the portal made comments that they felt UVA was not committed to the football game. Don't shoot, I'm the messenger. That it was out there and it was said. So one of the things that I think is important is in the state is using the ties that they have, the tradition, the legacies. DJ Tolliver is a great lineman. I learned a lot of Todd. His dad is a UVA alum.
An uncle too.
Right. And Terry Kirby's son is coming in. You got Chris Slade. His ties are probably better down in Georgia, as you said, Jackie. So I think those kind of things. And then there are UVA schools. There's programs that send kids. Reestablishing those, I think, is very, very important. And then grabbing the kids from North Carolina, Angelo Crowell, some of the great players, Yabrinel Isabel out of Bluefield, I believe it was Bluefield, West Virginia. And then getting back to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's been key to them. I think there's enough there, but I think it's shifting that back to what they need to do. And I think it is a tough task, but I think
it is.
They've got a good shot at it. And it's changing perception.
So Jack, we could do this for the next 4 hours. You are blowing us away with your knowledge. Let's see if we can get you back after the signing period, and let's see how things kind of settle out. in February, because we want to give time for our viewers to learn a little bit more about you. Like, you're spitting all this knowledge, but where did it come from? How did you become interested in this? Let's learn a little bit more about Jacquie. So, Kirk, you want to kick off any particular questions?
Yeah, well, you're a Hurricane. So are you from Florida? Tell us a little bit about, coming up and, being a Hurricane, great school, and a little bit more about your journey, Jacquie.
Yeah, so I was actually born in Miami, Florida. So, but I didn't actually live there. My family moved around a lot. My dad's from Italy and my mom's from Brazil. So we lived in Florida, but we actually I was born in Florida, then lived in Australia for 2 years, then went back to Florida, and stayed there until Hurricane Andrew. Was when I was about 4, and then destroyed our house. So my parents decided to move to Italy, to where my dad's from. And then we stayed there and then lived in England for a couple of years. And that's when I actually started loving sports. My dad is a sports agent. So he dealt with La Liga and EPL and those players. So he worked there in Europe. So that's where I started loving sports. He would take me to games and matches, and he would also help me, learn how to watch film. At that point, it was soccer, but I was watching film with him. And he would also scout players in Brazil. So I would be watching, he would teach me like some of the technique. I tried to play soccer. I wasn't that great. So I wanted to watch and learn the technical side of it. And then I decided to go back to Miami because Donna Shalala at that point put a lot of money in the School of Communications. Mm-hmm. So she built a whole new building, and she was able to get some of the presidential debates there. So I was able to cover those as a student. So I went there for school. That's when I started learning about college football and basketball, because my brother went to Miami during the heyday of the national championship of University of Miami in the 90s. But I was too young. I didn't really understand what was going on. I just remember Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was part of the team, and he went to WWF, and I loved him with the people's eyebrow. But so that was my experience of college football. But when I went back to Miami, I decided to learn a little bit more college football. Randy Shannon was the head coach, and I started learning a little bit more basketball. I watched European basketball, which is very different. So I was starting to learn more about basketball. I remember watching NBA when I was 5, when Michael Jordan came to play the Miami Heat. And that was my only experience with basketball when I was 5 or 6, because we lived in England and I couldn't watch those games because of the time difference. So I just started to learn about the game. And then I started working my career in TV first, and then recruiting just kind of fell in my lap. And then that was a whole new ballgame of trying to learn. Recruiting changes almost every year. And I will say it was probably the most overwhelming first year I've ever had at a job, was covering high school recruiting.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially in Florida,
I first started in Virginia. And that was, so I like the fact that I started covering UVA first, because I think if I went straight to covering SEC recruiting, I probably would have completely abandoned covering college recruiting at that point. So I started covering Virginia recruiting in 2013 is when my first year of covering recruiting, and just learning the rules, because as a reporter, you have these high schoolers telling you stuff. And at first I'm like, when you're talking to these kids, they're naive kids. They're so young, and they're saying like, oh, this high school coach talked to me on high school campus. And I'm like, that's not legal. I can't report this part. So you're trying to also help these high schoolers be like, we're not going to report on that part, and this is why. And then I'm like, next time you talk to a reporter, you do this. But that's sort of the stuff when like a 22, 23-year-old me is trying to educate a 17-year-old kid, like, this is what you say, this is what you don't say. And also me learning, okay, when's the contact period? What does this mean? When can coaches visit? And I was very grateful to meet several college coaches that kind of took me in and kind of helped me watch film, and broke down the game with me so that I could learn a little bit, kind of like what my dad did when it came to soccer. I was very blessed to having met some of these college coaches, a lot of them down in Florida, and them taking the time with me and not ignoring me, and just saying, like, I would go to them and be like, so what are you, when they go to these summer 1-day camps that they host, I'm like, so what are you actually looking at? Like, when you're looking at the DBs, like what are you looking at? So then I know next time when I go to the camp, and you'd be like, okay, look at his footwork, and then look at his hips, and just them taking the time by doing that, now when I go to camps, I know exactly what to look at because, you know, the coach down in Florida said this is what they're looking at to go. So I kind of went and I covered UVA for a while. And actually when Bronco Mendenhall's first introductory press conference was my last day on the Virginia beat. And then I went to cover the Gators for a few years and I saw Jim McElwain, crash and burn. And then I saw Dan Mullen for a few years. And then I came here and then Dan Mullen lost his job while I was there. So, and I joked, it was funny because when Dan Mullen was fired, I texted my buddies down there. I was like, "Oh, you guys are having a coaching search. That must be fun." And then a couple weeks later, I had my own coaching search that I was covering. So I guess the karma got me on that one. But yeah, it's been an adventure. Like recruiting is very, very different. You know, I started journalism because I wanted to tell stories, and I still do that on occasion. I still like telling.
You're very, very good at it. You're very good at storytelling.
Oh, thank you. So that's still something I really like. But covering recruitment, you're just like, I joke with my husband, my phone is always on. I have notifications. Like right now, there's 2 kids that were visiting this weekend that I like have them on commitment watch. So their tweets and Instagram posts are notified to my phone right now. I told my husband, you know, like I will be on call until those 2 kids make their decision. And I don't know what it is with kids, but I always am driving on I-64 when they make a decision.
Oh, I just want to say one thing. You went to the University of Miami, and I'm a big Dan Le Batard fan. I listened to the podcast and been following him for years. He's my age, and that they do have that great group of people that have come through there. Have you met any of that whole Le Batard crew?
I have not met Le Batard. I met Stacy Kober. She was a University of Miami alum too. She does a lot of stuff that she comes in there, especially if you're a female sportscaster. She comes in. The University of Miami has their own cable station. So we had a weekly sports show on Friday nights, and you also have the new shows that they did. So she would come in and talk to you and kind of break down your reel for you. She broke down my stuff as well. And then what I did when I was in Miami, I actually talked to the NBC affiliate down there. If you're familiar with them, they do have a really good special investigations unit, which has those long investigation pieces. Yep. So I worked with them a lot because those guys were the best journalism of best reporters in the market. I mean, they follow a story for months and they have to go through so many legal hoops to get those stories on. Yeah. So I focus a lot of my attention with them because if I wanted to be a good reporter, those are the reporters that I wanted to kind of emulate because they had to make sure everything was crossed and dotted and they had to make sure everything was right because any story that they put out always had legal ramifications for the TV station. So although I was going to do sports, I focus a lot of my attention on those guys and learning from them.
So covering the Gators and being up here in ACC land, right. Talk about that difference because the University of Florida, I've been there and I've walked and I've seen the complex, the facilities, and it's just literally a different world. And in University of Florida, for those who don't know it, it is a big school. May not be Ohio State big or some of the larger schools. Central Florida may be the biggest one or outside of the University of Phoenix, but it's such a different world down there. I mean, talk to us about that difference. And they were a basketball school for a while with Billy Donovan, but that difference that you see in facilities are one, but tell us about that, the difference in what you see in Charlottesville or what you saw at Miami.
Well, I'll just say this. It's not just Florida. I'll tell you, I've been to a Tennessee game.
Oh, Rocky Top is fantastic.
Yeah, unbelievable atmosphere. But go ahead. So the SEC is different.
Yeah, the SEC is, except Vanderbilt. Poor Vanderbilt.
Right.
But no, and actually it's kind of ironic. When I went from UVA to Florida, my first day on the beat for Mike London was when they did the walkthrough of the George Welsh indoor practice facility because they just built it. And then ironically, my first day at Florida was when they debuted their indoor practice facility. So actually Virginia was ahead of Florida in the practice facility race. And then obviously they weren't because Florida just built theirs and opened it up in the last year, their practice facility. So, but yeah, Florida is a different ball game. I mean, the Swamp holds like 90,000 people.
Right.
So the Auburn game, I remember the year that they went to the SEC championship game and Kyle Trask came in for Felipe Franks. after Felipe was injured during that Kentucky game. Kyle Trask came in, and that Auburn game at home, you would go deaf from how loud that stadium was.
Yep.
And then I watched the game at Death Valley. It was that night game between LSU and Florida. And I was on the sideline when Kyle Trask threw for Jacob Copeland, and Jacob Copeland ran the wrong route. And it was just, my ears just popped from all the noise in there. And it's just a different environment. Just people are so into football. It's a religion down there. It's very like people. I remember thinking I have to moderate the message boards today. And it's just like, it's insane how, like, you know, you think UVA message boards is insane.
Yeah.
But you look at those and it's just like I've been looking at Swamp 24/7, our Florida site, during the whole Jaden Rashada thing. And I'm like, bless all those people who have to deal with that right now. But even like just today, for instance, you know, like I'm waiting for the 2 kids that have visited. If I was on the Florida beat, I would be more stressed right now, because not only do you have to compete, like say if I worked for the 24/7 site, you have to compete for the rivals on 3, Gator Country, Gator Bait, and there's one more, my gosh, Inside the Gators. So you have 5 sites that cover recruiting, going for the same kids. And a lot of time, if you're on the official visitor, I would go to the airport and sit inside the check-in lobby,
man,
and wait for kids to come in so I can interview them. I knew exactly what the SUVs, black SUVs, look like. I would get their itinerary after that interview. I knew exactly what time and what flights they go, because it's a Gainesville airport. It's kind of like Charlottesville. So I knew they would, if you're coming from South Florida, there's only one Miami flight leaving at 2:30 p.m. I still remember this, 2:30 p.m. So they're going to take that flight out. So I would stay there. I would say goodbye to my son and my kids. I didn't have my daughter at that point. So to say, I'll be like, all right, I'm leaving at 9 a.m. and I only get back at 5 p.m. I would stay in front of the airport during every official visitor weekend to get kids there. I don't do that here. It's very, very different, because that's how people want information. For like visitors after games, we would be a 2-person team. So Bob, who would cover the team, he would go down and do pressers, interviews. I would stay outside the stadium and wait for kids to come out. And because I'm actually across the street, I'm technically not on campus anymore, so I can interview them. So I would wait across the way and cover recruiting. So it's very different, because you need to get those stories up, because people are reading stories at 1, 2, 3 in the morning. Sometimes they're writing like 15. Sometimes they're writing 15 stories about recruiting at like 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Jacquie, you just nailed it, because I want to tell you a story, because this is a Sunday night. I was up late because I'm the guy that cuts all this and gets it ready, and Rusty edits some of it. But it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was just checking Twitter. And guess what? There was a UVA football player's dad on there, and he said, my son just got shot. And it turned out to be that was one of the players' actual dads, one of the kids that was from Florida. But it's like that information comes out so quick.
Yeah.
It's so much harder to get a scoop. And then when you get a scoop, is it appropriate to put it out there? You know, you have to work, because you're with, you know, a button down 247. But, you know, if you're interviewing and people are tracking where kids are, I mean, that's a big deal. So speaking of, Rusty, I know you wanted to cover this, but, you know, that was such a tragedy with the 3 young men that lost their lives. I mean, I know it was shocking, and then they ended up one game got suspended and they didn't play the Tech game. But how is the, you know, Wahoo Nation, how are they doing now that it's been a few months with that? I
mean, how can you? It's hard. You know, you talk to a couple of these students, and, you know, a lot of them knew these guys very personally. You know, Deshaun Perry, the young man from South Florida, I knew him since he was a sophomore in high school, because Florida was recruiting him. We were evaluating him. So I met him for the first time at an Under Armour camp in Miami before he even took his official visit to Virginia. It was actually funny. Jamie Oakes was the 24/7 writer. And I was like, hey, I'm talking to Deshaun Perry. I told him about Bodo's Bagels, and he's going to visit y'all do you want me to do an interview with him? And so I've known Deshaun Perry and his dad since then. Like I remember, you know, talking to Deshaun's dad since then. And when I came back on the beat, one of the first people to message me was Deshaun Perry's dad, saying, welcome back, where you're finally going to cover my son. I'm like, yeah, I'm excited to cover your son. It's just, it is really hard, because there's no why. There still hasn't been that why. And I think without that, a lot of these guys are trying to move on. Some of them are deciding to move on in different places. You saw that by some of them entering the transfer portal. Some of them have transitioned outside of football, and they're thinking of questions outside of football. So, and then you're trying to see how you can avoid this. And it's hard when you think that this could happen anywhere. And that's hard for a young person to think. I mean, that's hard for me to think as a mom. You know, I want, you know, my kids to go to a field trip because these young men just went to a field trip. I want to know they're safe. So it's hard, especially because this is still, I mean, it's January, so it's only 2 months ago. So it's not that far removed. And, you know, the coaches, you think of what the coaches have to go through. I mean,
oh my goodness.
They had to go back on the recruiting trail.
That's
almost
exactly,
as soon.
they still got to recruit. Still got to recruit. A month later, they're trying to sign guys. And I mean, for them too, I mean, they have to go into people's living rooms. And how many times have they been asked, is my child going to be safe if they go to Virginia? I mean, that is a question that they received on the trail. And that is the thing that they're constantly reminded about it. You know, like Coach Higgins, who's very connected with those 2 wide receivers. Lavelle Davis was almost like another son to him. And, you know, his sons consider him a brother. He had to get those questions every time he spoke to a recruit. And then even now, they had a junior day. That was a topic of discussion. They had another official visitor weekend this weekend. They're going to have another junior day next weekend. Every time, this is not going to go away for them. Obviously, they're going to have that loss of life that they're always going to remember, but they're always going to get that constant reminder because they're not going to be in team meetings. Parents are always going to ask. And unfortunately, other programs are going to start using it. I mean, not even going to start. I mean, already using it. Because that is something that, you know, they're not going to come out and say that the shooting happened on the campus, but they're going to say, and I know they've done this, go like, here on so-and-so's campus, your son will be safe. That's a sentence that's going to be used in recruiting. Recruiting is an ugly, negative business. It is.
And it's going to be used. So it's something that, unfortunately, this staff is going to have to deal with moving forward in a lot of different ways. And it's hard to heal when you keep getting reminded like that.
I also think it's a galvanizing thing. And I think Virginia, Coach Elliott, they've handled it extremely well. I think it is galvanizing because it's a challenge. And it was so right not to play the Virginia Tech game because
I agree.
No team was really in it. And, you know, if kids are looking for a way out, they're going to use that. When Virginia Tech had 32 students killed, there were some players, and I went to school there. You can keep your doors open. It's very safe. But you're right. Recruiting is a very dirty game. And by the way, we're not going to get into the weeds, but in Florida and SEC land, the things that they do that nobody can talk about.
This is
Talk
true.
about cocktail parties.
Well, I mean, now NIL, I mean, you can talk, a lot of the stuff gets, but
Well,
now it's a little bit more open.
NIL makes it all legal. You could take NIL and it could be, you know, but I think that's a big, what SEC schools can offer that schools like, UVA and North Carolina, it's totally different. But so now you came back to Charlottesville because you were working. We're going to streamline this because basically you came up here, you worked with, was it the CBS or NBC affiliate?
I worked with the CBS affiliate. So they actually are CBS, ABC, and Fox. So the Newsplex at that time. I think now they're just called CBS 19 to kind of have a rebranding. So I worked at their affiliate. And then that's my first job. And then when I came back, I worked for Scout. So Scout Media, who was then bought out by 24/7.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
now, I don't know if you already said this, but by the way, I hit a snag. I'm like a little puppy dog. I'll go down and run. When you said Dwayne Johnson and all that, I was like, he has a home or a farm in Charlottesville.
In Charlottesville, that's right.
That got me off. I was with my penguin cap on. But so you went down to Florida, and now you're back.
We came back. My son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 3.5, so about 2 years ago. So I actually took 3 months off, and I wasn't planning to go back to work that early. But my husband, since we were here in Virginia, we decided to come back. And my old boss, who hired me from Scout, was looking at hiring me to cover Florida. He said, and I told him I couldn't because I was going to take some months off. He said, well, the Virginia job is opening up. Would you want to take that instead? And it just fell into place that I took about 3-4 months after my son was diagnosed with type 1 to kind of get used to our new world, because that really changes how you kind of operate, because you're learning how to use your carb ratios. At that point, he's on a pump now, but it used to be injections. So learning how to give your son injections, and then just learning how your life changes that way. And then a couple months later, I started the job covering UVA. So it was a very it was a difficult transition, but at the same time, it felt like home, because I was very different than my first time covering UVA. I was obviously very green. It was my first recruiting job, but I'm coming after covering the SEC, going back to UVA. And it felt like I wanted it. Like I was telling my husband, it was a lot of different turns that got me back to UVA, but now I feel like I can cover UVA how I wanted to cover it all those years ago. But I just didn't have the knowledge or the confidence to do that. And it's also nice that we have family here. So not only do I have my son, but I also have a 2-year-old daughter. So it's nice to have family around to help out with that.
And you also have a world-class health system that most markets that size do not have. That's the best hospital in Virginia, head and shoulders.
Yes, UVA has been great. We are, they've helped us. We are now on Omnipod 5. So if you have type 1 diabetes in your family, you know that it's an automated insulin pump. So we are finally getting sleep. My husband and I, because my son's 5, so a 0.1 units of insulin can tank him really easily. So with the pump, they kind of releases a couple like 0.025 or 0.01 units. So it allows him to get little bits of units and suspend insulin when he's got too much in his system. So it's helped us sleep, which has been great.
Okay, cool. Now, we're gonna start to try to wrap this up, but I did want to ask you one or two other things. One, and this again, wanting to learn a little bit more about you on the personal side. With parents from can you speak other languages?
I speak 4 languages. English is not my first language. Portuguese is my first language.
Portuguese.
Okay.
That's
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I'm actually trying to teach my kids Portuguese. It's kind of hard. Usually when I grew up, we only spoke Portuguese at home. And then my dad speaks like 8 languages because of his work. So I would speak Italian with him. And then my mom and my brothers would always speak Portuguese. And then here at home, we speak mostly English, but I'm trying to get my kids to learn Portuguese. They can count to 10 and know their colors so far, but it's just
true. And then I wanted to ask, so we know you're with your father's background with soccer and just being around sports, especially University of Miami. But did you? I know you said you played a little soccer, but did you play any other sports? And then, if so, how involved were you? And then outside of that, do you have a favorite athlete of all time? And it could be any sport.
Yeah.
And team. And team. And that team could be at the college level, the professional.
So for me, I did play soccer. I played holding midfielder in high school. That was the end of my career. I decided not to pursue it because I wanted to go to University of Miami, and I wasn't good enough to be a D1 athlete. I knew that. So I just wanted to go and do broadcast journalism. I played tennis for a little bit. My dad built a tennis court in our backyard in Florida. So we played a little bit of tennis. In England, we played netball, which is kind of like basketball, but you can't dribble, and you can only move 3 times in your ball unless you travel. So you had to, when you catch a ball, it can move 3 steps, then pass on to the next person. So I played netball a little bit. So it's very different than basketball. But as far as players, I mean, I grew up in a soccer household, so I liked the original Ronaldo from Brazil. And also Roberto Carlos is one of my favorite players ever growing up. He was a left back for Real Madrid and also a starting left back for Brazil. But I also really love tennis because when you're in England, you also love Wimbledon. So I watched Venus and Serena in their first ever matchup against each other at Wimbledon.
Wow.
So I loved watching tennis, and I loved Pete Sampras when I was growing up. Like every time I went on the court, I thought I was the female version of Pete Sampras. Obviously not, but that's who I thought I was whenever I got out there. So those are kind of the athletes that I really look up to. I love Pete Sampras, and I love those 2 from Brazil. I still have a signed Roberto Carlos jersey that I have in my office. And those are the players I look up to. Like every time I see a Brazil play, yes, I love the players now and I'll cheer for them. It's funny, like I have it's like USA, Brazil, and Italy are the three teams that I always cheer for. USA first, and then Brazil and Italy, depends on who's on each side. I always look at the roster and like which ones I like this year. But I always liked Ronaldo. Was always that 2002 South Korea Brazil team is my favorite team I've ever watched, and that was because Roberto Carlos and Ronaldo were on that team.
Yeah. So we always talk about food. we do this, we do. What's your favorite place in Charlottesville?
Oh, in Charlottesville? Oh my goodness. Right now it's Lampo Pizza.
Okay.
It's like if you're Italian, that's actually pretty close to Italian pizza. That's probably hands down my favorite, especially their one of a white sauce with arugula and prosciutto. That's my favorite pizza.
Yeah.
And Texas de Brazil is my favorite in Richmond area.
Okay. Oh, cool. And then, and so we'll finish on these last two questions. Are you watching any? Are you streaming, or do you have time to watch stuff or binge anything online? And then, or do you have a favorite movie of all time? And it doesn't have to be a sports movie.
Does Bluey count as a TV series that I have to watch? My kids are really into Bluey right now. Actually, my daughter's birthday is in April, and we're doing a Bluey birthday theme party. She's requested.
My kids Dora the Explorer. I just love my kids love her.
Blue's Clues. So on your front, are you like? Do you have a guilty pleasure, like reality TV? Are you doing a series? Anything like that?
Right now, I'm trying to think. I used to love Supernatural. That was my go-to show because I grew up on Buffy and Angel when I was a teenager. So right. Supernatural is one of my favorite TV shows. I will go back and rewatch it. I think I've rewatched the series maybe 4 times already. That is by far my favorite show. I love how it's written. I love supernatural things. I love paranormal. So that is probably my favorite show that I will always go back to watch. I also lately I love like the Marvel series that's come out, like WandaVision, those type of shows. My husband's really into Star Wars, so we tend to watch those as well. Like movies, I just really like, let's see, any old-fashioned romantic comedies. I usually go for those, like Love Actually, Dirty Dancing, all the stuff that the viewers now will probably not know. The generation now, if I mentioned Dirty Dancing, they'll think the newer version. No, the one with Patrick Swayze.
Nobody.
Jennifer Grey.
Yeah,
exactly. No one puts baby in the corner. So those are still some of my favorite movies growing up, and I still go back to those.
Yeah. Have you ran into like Howie Long or Sissy Spacek or Dave Matthews? You guys got all the celebrities in Charlottesville.
I've run into Chris Long a few times.
Oh, is he down there?
Yeah, he's here still. Yeah, he's here.
Right.
So I ran down to Chris Long, but not really. I mean, Grisham has been in the UVA basketball games. John Grisham and obviously Steph Curry and Ty Jerome were there on the last home game for Virginia basketball.
Isn't Dave Balducci the author? Isn't he a Charlottesville guy also?
Not sure.
Well, Anastasia, they proved by DNA. There was always a rumor that Anastasia, the child of the Russian, the revolution.
Yeah.
There was a rumor. Well, they proved it with DNA. She did live in Charlottesville. In case
wow.
Oh, yeah. You could ask people around there. They proved that she lived there. So.
Kirk, I think you're asking the wrong question. You should be asking Tony Bennett and Chris Long, have they ever met Jackie? That's exactly where you're supposed to go.
Tony Bennett's
John Sampson, next time you're in Charlottesville. Or have you ever met Jackie of 247 Sports? Well, come on.
You've been in Tony Bennett's house.
I have not. I was not part of that meeting I have not between that meeting of, what was it? The Joe Harris and Akil Mitchell. We went down to Tony Bennett's house after the Tennessee loss and then got the Tennessee turnaround that season. That was the big storyline for that whole season for Virginia basketball. I was not part of that meeting.
All right. Well, Jackie, this has been great. I mean, again, we could do this for another hour or two. He told you, once we connect with somebody, we could talk all day. So that means you have been outstanding. And you are a wealth of knowledge. But we'd love to have you back. I mean, maybe at the end of the heavy part for recruiting or the NCAAs, or
Spring
just
football too.
Spring football. Yeah. So I appreciate you joining the show. This has been great. I know our fans are going to really enjoy this. And next time we let Kirk be a part of this, even though he went to Virginia Tech. But we may not.
I want to
listen next time.
UVA fans are going to love this because this usually doesn't happen. I knew I couldn't get into UVA, and I didn't spend the money on the application. There you go, Wahoos. I'm a Hokie on purpose. And by the way, William and Mary, I wanted to go there, but they didn't want me to go there. So,
look, I'll say this. Kirk, I forgot, your daughter graduated from UVA, so you can join us.
Good genetics, good brains. There we go.
All right.
Take us out, Rusty.
All right. So again, Jackie, I want you to plug your site, the things you do, every thing you're a part of, and then give you a good chance to do that right now.
Sure. So I write stories for Wahoos247.com. So we cover recruiting, we call it college basketball, college football. So right now it's a busy period with kids visiting. Like I said, Virginia hosted a couple official visitors this weekend. They're hosting another junior day, their second of the month next weekend, and they're going to host a couple of good in-state targets. So we'll preview those. We talk to the kids after the visit. We tend to kind of do crystal ball picks so you can kind of see where things are trending, so you know who to watch out for, who not to watch out for. We do our best to cover the transfer portal, which is insanity. So we try to say which targets for you to keep an eye on, which one are kind of going away or where the recruiting is trending towards. So we do that, but we also cover the team as well. So we'll be busy with spring football. We'll be traveling with the Virginia basketball team wherever they go in the NCAA tournament. So we'll be on the ground as they also play. So we do that for football too. So we travel with the team for football and for basketball. So we'll be there for the ACC tournament. And if they go as far as they go in the NCAA tournament, we will be there too. So again, that's Wahoos247.com. We also have a podcast called The Good Old Podcast that you can available anywhere where you listen to your podcast, and on the YouTube channel as well on Wahoos247. So, and on Twitter, I'm on @JacquieFran_. So there's a lot of places where you can find our content.
That is great. Great. Yeah. So thanks again, Jackie. So for Jackie and my co-host Kirk, this has been the Kirk and Byrd Show. We are out.